Welcome back to Morning Express. It's now 25 minutes to 7 local time, and this is Morning Express. Now, would like to get to the dawn debate, but before we talk about what we're going to look at on the dawn debate, which is literally the cost of living in Kenya, which has become a major talking point politically, but it's because Kenyans are feeling the heat. We'd just like to give comparison and give context to this particular conversation, and this is in comparison of some of the prices that we are talking about here in Nairobi and across the country. If you compare what you bought last year and this year, what exactly is the price difference? So let's just go through some of those figures, and let's start with the inflation. And the cost of food in Kenya has increased by 20.98% in April of 2017 over the same month this time last year. So the increase that we're looking at here is an increase of 20.98%. Food inflation in Kenya has averaged 11.07% from 2010 to 2017 and reaching an all-time high of 26.20% in October of 2011 and a record low of 1.44 in October 2012. Now, the headline inflation is a measure of the total inflation within an economy, including commodities such as food and energy. And we'll break this down for you if we can move on to the next board. Now, the prices which tend to have much more or to violate is to be prone to inflammatory spikes are some of those commodities that we feel. And you see, the thing is, food is a basic commodity. So when food prices have gone up, then it becomes a pinch for everybody. And of course, we do know that our salaries don't go up the same rate as our food prices go up. Now, in January of 2013, we had a 5.53% increase. As for December, it was 8.01. And don't worry, we'll give you these figures break it down right to the limit. Moving on to the next board, where we have the cost of living in 2014, January, it had gone up by 7.21%, and in December, 6.02%. So you can see a steady increase. That was 2013. Now we're in 2014. Let's move on to the next board, where we have 2015 in January, 5.53 and 8.01. Of course, these figures, as they are, sometimes may not make sense in this kind of breakdown, but we'll come to that not too long from now. 2016, this is last year. In January, the increase was, the cost of living was at 7.78% increase. In December, it was at 6.35% increase. Let's look at our current status today. January was 6.99% increase, and in April, where we are now, because of course May has not yet been compiled, is 11. That's quite a big difference, 11.48%. All right, let's move on to the next board. Now, if we would bring down this to actual facts and figures, the commodity price for 1 kilo of sugar in 2013 was 122.16 shillings, but look at the price difference. There you have 136 shillings 0.45. That's the current. It's also important to note that these prices, of course, may vary slightly depending on where you are. These are prices that we picked from Nairobi, and that may be, that's the basis of which we're having this. But in some areas, it might be slightly different. But still, it gives us an idea. Maize flour, a 2 kilogram, was 112.14 in 2013. As per 2017, it's 135.87. Looking at milk, these are basic commodities. Looking at milk, we have 38.31 in 2013. This is when the Jubilee government took over, and in 2017, it's 60.21. The price of electricity at 50 kilowatts, we have 568, but as at 2013, and 590.49 in 2017. Still looking at a few more commodities, the price of 1 litre of kerosene was at 83 shillings 0.49 in 2013. Today, if you're buying a litre of kerosene, you are likely to pay thereabouts of 68.93 shillings. 1 litre of petrol, 112 shillings was what you'd pay in 2013. Right now, it's 101. Although it's important to note that here we actually have a decrease in price, slight decrease in price. Then 1 litre of diesel is 106 is what you'd have paid for it at 2013. It has come down to 91.39. So of course, logically speaking, one might ask the question, if fuel prices have actually come down, why is it that we're paying more out of pocket for our food items? But that is part of the debates that we're going to have. And Michelle Ngele is going to take this up now and introduce our guest this morning to have that debate. Remember, you're welcome to participate in the same debate. You can do that via Twitter. Michelle.
Right, of course, Michael. Douglas Miano joins us in studio. He is a senior lecturer at the Department of Plant Science at the University of Nairobi. Many thanks for joining us on Morning Express.
Thank you, Michelle.
And of course, this is the bigger debate in the country right now, the rising cost of food prices. Parliament is reconvening today, and top of the agenda is the introduction of the supplementary budget to sort of ease the cost of living in the country. Among the things that will happen will be the removal of tariffs and taxes on imports. But yes, Kenya can import, especially in terms of grains, can import maize from COMESA countries, but there isn't much surplus in the continent as we speak because the drought really is a global phenomena. So what other options does Kenya have? And this also now opens a debate into, in terms of using technology to stabilize the food insecurity in the country. And that brings up the issue of genetically modified foods. Talk to us about that.
Thank you, Michelle. It's true that you have said that we are intending to have food from the COMESA region. Mm-hmm. And we also know that we don't have surplus of food in the COMESA region. So the question is of where are we getting it from? Mm-hmm. So we are, it's like going to the granary of somebody who does not have enough, and you want to rob the little that they have so that you can feed the others. Mm-hmm. When you talk about food security, you look at it in different ways. Number one, the food must be available in enough quantities. It must be accessible to everybody. Mm-hmm. It must be of high nutrition. So if you are saying that you are going to import the food from, or to get the food from the COMESA region because it's not GMO, and it is not enough in the COMESA region, then you have a problem. Mm-hmm. When you bring in the aspect of technology, and more so the aspect of GMO, if you look at the countries that have been producing maize, which is genetically modified, these countries have surplus. They have more than enough. Mm-hmm. One of the things that has been proposed is to get the non-GM maize from Mexico. If you get it from Mexico, a 90 kg bag will be costing about 3,600 Kenya shillings. If you compare it to the other side and you look at go to countries which are producing GM maize, which is in surplus, for example, Brazil, the US, or Argentina, mm-hmm. If we import maize from there, it would cost us 2,700 Kenya shillings. That's a difference of 900 Kenya shillings per bag. So, of course, we are not saying that this is the only solution, but if we take, for example, just that case of getting maize where there is surplus, we'll be saving 900 Kenya shillings per 90 kg mm-hmm. bag.
Let's focus on these countries that have used genetically modified foods and now have surplus. Are there any of them that are in the African continent?
Yes, there is one country, which is South Africa. Mm-hmm. It's the only country in Africa that is producing GM maize. Initially, we had Egypt, but now they are not producing. Mm-hmm. So, over 90% of maize produced in South Africa is actually GM.
Right. So what is it that is blocking the adoption of genetically modified crops in the continent?
There are a number of factors, one of them being the regulatory issues. Regulatory, we mean the government coming in to control the use of the technology. We have what you call the African model role that came in to try and see how the technology can be adapted in Africa. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they did is that they made the process to be almost impossible for it to go through. And this is a political process And if the political system does not give the leeway for science to advance, it makes it very difficult.
And of course, that's a debate that we've had in Kenya. We had research that had begun on GM foods, and then at some point the research had been discontinued. As of March of this year, we've had the GM research on maize that had also been discontinued. I'm not sure if that is still the process today, but talk to us about how GM foods work in averting food security, because as it is right now, agriculture is dependent on climate, and we're trying to move away from agriculture that is dependent on seasonal fluctuations, so to speak. How do GM foods come in to avert the crisis?
So the GM technology, what they did is to look at the constraints that limit production. And this could be many. Currently, what you are talking about is drought. So, and when you talk about drought, we are saying that there is not enough water, enough moisture to make the crop to grow up to maturity. One of the technologies that you can adapt is to look for a variety that is not utilizing a lot of moisture. If you have just enough moisture, maybe if a crop like maize takes 4 months, if you take, it's going to take 3 months for when there is rainfall, or it's going to use less amount of water for it to grow, then you can adapt that. And if you look at maize, the one that now is being tested in Kenya, it is what we call the water efficient maize for Africa. That means that these varieties are supposed to be utilizing less water, so that as a climate change is coming in and we are saying that we are reducing the amount of water, that crop can grow to maturity and give you yield even when the water is not enough.
Right.
That's one constraint. The other constraint is about what we call the biotic factors. For example, the pests. In Kenya, we've had 2 main outbreaks of diseases or pests in the recent 3 or 4 years. The first one was what you call the maize-rhizome necrosis disease. And in 2012, 2013, it affected the maize baskets for Kenya. And this is a disease that is caused by viruses and can be managed by this technology. So that means that if you have a technology that can be able to grow the maize even in the presence of the disease, you will be able to have a yield. This year, we're having an outbreak of the fall armyworm. We've heard from Western Kenya region that the armyworm is actually affecting a lot of crops. And this is might be the region that we're having the best crop in the country now. So if you look at the BT maize, the BT maize is resistant to the fall armyworm.
And maybe, Douglas, as you continue to describe the benefits of GMO, it sounds like they could be or will be the solution for us to avert this food crisis that we're having. And it's not just in Kenya, it's world over. But there is a fear for genetically modified organisms for various reasons. And maybe for the layman, is it true that they're unhealthy? Is it true that once they're genetically modified, then they compromise the health side of it?
It is not true. Safety, and especially when you're looking at the GM foods, we don't lump them together and we are saying that just GM foods. We do it what we call case by case. And for any GM crop, for any trait or for any commodity that is being introduced, it goes through a thorough process. Actually, it is more thorough than any of the other crops that we grow, which is coming from nature. And the thing is, I'm a scientist. I am involved in the development of, for example, the cassava that is resistant to viruses. This cassava, it is me who will be eating. It is my children. It is my people who will be eating it. So first of all, I'm concerned by my safety. I'm concerned about the safety of everybody else. That is from personal point of view. I cannot bring in something that I know eventually is going to affect me. If you look at it from also the regulatory point of view, the world appreciates. And if you look at the conventions and the laws that govern these technologies, starting all the way from the Convention on Biological Diversity that brought in and accepted that this technology, biotechnology, is possible to bring benefits, but it might have some adverse effects. So they brought in mechanisms of saying that it is protected or has been assessed for safety. They brought in what we call the Cartagena Protocol. This protocol now highlighted on the steps of how these things should be done. So safety of GM foods, if there is any food that is assessed highly on foods of safety, it is GMOs.
Then why the resistance from the authorities for it to be developed? Because then it looks like given the fact that our pieces of land are shrinking because of the population, given that arable land is shrinking because of development, why then the resistance for GMO? Because it sounds like over a smaller piece of land, you can grow more. It is more drought resistant. It is more, what should I call it? It's not so weather dependent. It can be modified that way. Why the resistance?
It's new technology to us, because it has been there for the last 21 years.
I mean, just recently we had lawmakers literally come almost to blows with researchers over this, because the lawmakers now say, why are we adopting foreign technology? Why can't we have homegrown biotechnology that can increase yields in the country? So is this GM foods the only option that we have?
To put it straight, that it is not the only technology, but it is one of the technologies that can be adapted. When we say that homegrown or homemade products, it takes time. And it's for us to know that today we don't have it, but we need it in the 5 years or 10 years or whichever number of years. So that means then we put the structures and the strategy to say that today we don't have the technology, but in 5, 10 years we should be having it. So for now, one of the challenges is that being new technology to us, and not everybody understands. And if we say that anything that we do not understand, we don't want it, that's not really true, and it's not correct, because there are many other things that we don't understand, but we adapt them. So for us, we are developing, we're in the process of developing. In the next 5 years, we shall be having our own products, which are developed in Kenya by the Kenyan scientists.
Right.
But for now, we may not have one, but we are almost there. For example, the BT maize that is supposed to be taken into the confined to the national performance trials, the Kenyan scientists have been involved in the process of its development. So we are there, and what we need is to know that even if we don't have the technology today, we will need it 5 years, we need it 10 years, and put the structures fully that requires. Whatever we say that we don't have, we see how do we move towards achieving it.
And of course, the introduction of GM foods, because it is still a debate that is ongoing in the country, is likely to be a long-term solution should it be implemented. But let's speak about the situation that we find ourselves in now. Farmers, of course, are complaining that the conditions are not so good. Support from the government side isn't so good. Focusing on the maize farmer today, what can they do in terms of technology to increase their yields and to shield themselves, so to speak, from the fluctuation climatic conditions that are going on every day? One of the solutions, of course, is using hybrid crops.
Thank you, Michelle. And in every technology, there must be a package of how to use it. If you're given a mobile phone, even if you're given the latest and you don't know how to use it, it will be there and you not use it. So even with the hybrids, there must be a package of how to utilize that hybrid. So for our farmers today, number one, it is sad that we have taken that maize is the only food that you can depend on. And we should also be looking at ways and saying that, okay, now the maize we have is prone to drought. Every time we plant and there's not enough moisture, the plant will not mature or it will not produce what it's supposed to produce. So are there alternative crops that we can also use at such moments? And they are there. So the next thing is that you do not necessarily have to plant maize year in, year out. We should be having programs. For example, if the people in Eastern region, they are planting maize every season, even when we know that the rain will not be enough for that crop. So in such a case, they should be advised that this season is not a season for maize, it's a season for another crop. Let me give you one case, example. I went into one of the farmer's fields, and he had planted sorghum on the sides of the field for animals. Inside the field, he had planted maize. The sorghum was already flowering and already had the seeds. And this sorghum was for animals. The maize was supposed to be the food, and the maize was already withering. So I was asking the farmer, why don't you change it? And you decide now, this maize, because it's not going to give you anything, you use it for the food and eat the sorghum. But that is not the way that they were thinking, because then they were shown that maize is a food. So it is tricky when you have no rain, you have no irrigation, and you want to plant maize.
Right. So what I get from that then is a diversification of most of our traditional crops in the country. But there's also a very wide perception that hybrid crops would also increase food security and pretty much attain food security. Where did we go wrong there?
It's not really that we went wrong, because we need the hybrids. They yield high, they'll give you better returns, but in times when we predict that there is rainfall, there is short of rains, in the regions where the maize is being grown, we should have alternatives. Number one, the alternative is that if we have the hybrids, those hybrids, and they are drought tolerant, so then we can use them in such places. But now when you don't have drought tolerant varieties, we cannot advise people to plant maize when there's shortage of rains. Because as long as there's not enough moisture, then that hybrid will not give you what you're supposed to give.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where is the place for forward planning? Because we have an increase in population today, and as a result, subdivision of land is causing there to be less arable land that people can plant, just by virtue of the fact that they're small pieces of land. Should the government get to a point where, for instance, they have areas which are purely for agriculture and cannot be subdivided? In other words, have it within the law. Because with time, where is forward planning for our generations to come? Because one of the reasons why we are where we are today is because we did not plan for it. The fact that there's climate change, the fact that there's an increase in development, the fact that there's an increase in population means our arable land is shrinking. Can the government come in and do anything about that?
Yes, and they should. And the RAD issues in Kenya is a tricky one, because already I know that my parents have a piece of land which is supposed to come to me and to my other brothers and sisters. It's supposed to be divided, and if you are changing from that, becomes already where we are. It becomes very tricky. So if that happens, where we can have large-scale production, for example, like wheat, that should be done in large-scale production, because if you divide it, then the cost of production becomes too high. So that might be one way. The other way is still saying that, okay, we still have these small pieces of RAD, which might be the way to go, and we might still have to, in the years to come, we might be still using those small pieces of RAD.
But there's a lot of technology in terms of hydro farming, where you don't really need land nowadays to plant any crops, but also a lot of concerns as to the health, safety of that.
It depends on which angle you're looking at it. I agree with you on the issue. That's where I was coming to. Use of technologies. Regardless, the people who are producing a lot of vegetables in around Nairobi, they are doing it in half a quarter acre of RAD, or even an eighth piece of RAD, because they have the greenhouses and they are using it and they are producing enough even to sustain their families. So the size of RAD may not just necessarily be one of the critical limiting factors. It is the type of farming that they are using.
Right.
So are we using the right technology to do the farming? And if we are adapting the technology, then we can continue to increase. Within a specific area, we increase or double or triple the amount of production within that small area. And that can only be done by adoption of technology.
All right. And of course, let's focus now on the traditional crops that we have. Like you mentioned, when you talk about food security, the first thing everybody talks about is maize, but there's a lot more food as opposed to maize. What other alternatives can farmers, especially the very traditional farmers who are used to just growing maize every season, what else can they adopt in terms of something that would increase food security, but also work for them in terms of commerce?
That's one of the challenges that you have brought in, especially the last one in terms of commercial purposes, because a lot of the crops may not have reached that point of commercialization because of what you call the market pool. Good examples of crops which are food security is we have cassava, we have bananas, we have sweet potatoes, we have sorghum, and a host of others. Those are just examples. The people who are growing cassava today are likely not to be going without food, because they don't have it. Because cassava, once the cassava has reached a point of where they have used enough rain and they're starting to produce the roots, certainly there will be food. The same thing with sweet potatoes, the same thing with sorghum. All of those are crops which have been here with us for many years, and they can be able to withstand the harsh weather conditions, and you can still be able to get a yield. The challenge that we got is that when maize came, when rice came, majority of people were shown that these are the foods for the elites. So we all went for it. If you go to the rural places, they would want to eat maize, they would want to eat bread, they would want to eat rice. If the people from the rural places come to Nairobi and you give them sweet potatoes in the morning, they'll be feeling that it is unfair. They want bread. So, but if we go back to sensitize the people and let them know that these traditional crops are part and parcel of food security, we'll be able to move forward and be able to protect ourselves.
Very good, Douglas. We'll take a break, but we'll be right back to maybe continue this conversation. And would like to invite you at home to also let us know what your thoughts are as to how we can ensure that we're also responsible, because as much as, of course, we are relying on farmers and government, we'd also like to hear from you. I'm sure we have farmers who would have ideas and would like to chip in on how we can ensure that our food prices at least are maintained at a reasonable cost. So we want to take a short break right here on Morning Express. We've got some stories that are making headlines, but do stay with us. We'll continue with this conversation. Then also later on, we're going to be looking at what Parliament is going to be talking about today, or what they're likely to talk about, and whether indeed they have the ability to avert or alleviate the soaring cost of living in Kenya. Do stay with us.